Hello, I am with Punya Mishra, who is the Associate Dean at the Office of Scholarship and Innovation at the Arizona State University, and we are going to talk about many things education. So Punya, can you tell us? Hello, Punya.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey in education and how did you end up becoming an educator?
Okay, well, it's a strange journey, so to speak, because I started out with an undergraduate in engineering from BITS Pilani a long time ago. I mean, growing up in India, if you're good at science and maths, and you either become an engineer or a doctor. So I became an engineer, and in very quickly I understood that that was not something that was my passion, that I was passionate about, what I cared deeply about. I loved science, I loved math, art, literature, film, all of those things. So I said, okay, I'm going to make educational film. So that's how I ended up at the Industrial Design Center in IIT Bombay, getting my master's in design. And that's when I first started working with the Mac, the old Macs with the floppy drive. But it sort of clicked for me that something interesting was happening there, and wanted to explore that further. So, long story short, ended up getting my PhD in educational psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and then got a job at Michigan State University. So I was there for 18 years. Most of my work there was around technology and education, working with teachers. I directed the master's program in EdTech over there, developed a hybrid PhD program, worked with teachers across the board. And then finally, a couple of years ago, I got this position at Arizona State at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College as Associate Dean of Scholarship and Innovation. There I do a variety of things, everything from sort of looking at new technologies and learning to supporting faculty in research, and also sort of the latest initiative, which is working with school districts as they seek to sort of transform the way they work and how teaching and learning happens. So it's sort of working at a systems level to see how we can affect change through sort of an open-ended collaborative process of design. So we don't come in with solutions, we don't even come in with the questions. We work with the school superintendents and leadership, teachers, parents, business leaders working together to identify what the challenges are and sort of work through with them to scaffold that process of identifying solutions. So it's sort of a weird, twisted journey to where I am today.
Yeah, and sounds a lot of fun now given the systems change focus.
Well, I think it's been fun the entire time, honestly.
Sure.
I think the 4 years in Pilani were fun in certain ways and
Yeah.
not necessarily, I feel professionally, I think fulfilling, though I made some good friends there and, learned to drink over there and all that other good stuff, and actually started writing, so I used to write short stories and all of that. So it was great, I think, from that point of view. But I think ever since then, ever since I got into IDC, it's always been fun. I think that's been a big part of sort of learning and growing and just interacting with people and creating things. It's
Sure.
been great, yeah.
Sure. So there is a lot of talk around this 21st century skills now,
Right.
and you've done some work around that, and just curious, what are these 21st century skills that are so different from the
Right.
20th century skills?
So it's kind of tragic, right, that we are talking in 2018 about 20th century skills. We should have been talking 1980,
Sure.
to be prepared for the 21st century. But that's said and done. We did a sort of a survey of around 15 or 20 different reports, books written by, European Union, and there's a Partnership of 21st Century Skills, Young Zhao, Howard Gardner, the usual suspects, and sort of did an analysis as to what is common across all these different frameworks, because there's a bunch of them out there, right? So I think three key things sort of emerged as being crucial. So one, we sort of labeled them into three categories. So one is sort of what we need to know, or foundational knowledge. So that would include disciplinary knowledge, science, math, music, what have you, art, literature, cross-disciplinary knowledge, so the ability to cross disciplines, and what we call basic digital literacy skills, right? The second big category was what we call meta-knowledge, is how do you act on that foundational knowledge? So most people in the 21st century skills talk about that. So they would things like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, those kinds of things. And the third piece, big chunk, was what we call humanistic knowledge, which are sort of the values that we bring to the process, right? So they would be things like work and life skills, ethical moral awareness, global awareness, things that way, because we live in a world which is changing dramatically. Those kinds of things become increasingly important. So a couple of things to see here. One, that what we need to know, how we act on that knowledge and the values that we bring to it are all important. So it's not that we can only focus on foundational or only on this and only on that. So we have to look at all three. That's one piece. Second, I think kind of interesting is that if you go back like 100 years or 150 years to some educator and say, the job of the educator of school, of society is to prepare the next generation, is give them something to know, how to act on that knowledge and some values that we bring to it, they'll be like, what's new? So at some level, I would say this connects us back to a sort of long tradition of educators, that this is what we've always done. Now, a twist on that, of course, is that the context within which this is playing out is dramatically different today. I mean, we live in a world of internet connectivity, we live in a world of fake news, we live in a world of, the technology which is all around us, we live in a world which is increasingly globalized, we live in a world which is, economically getting more and more split up, getting more tribal. So it's a very different universe in that sense. So I think from that perspective, what each of these things mean and how they relate to each other has changed, right? So, for instance, a simple example would be, take any discipline, for instance. Let's take physics or astronomy. I have a friend who's an astronomer. I don't think he has looked through a telescope in 10 years. What he does, he gets Google data from Kepler or some satellite, and it's petabytes of data. He writes code to analyze how black holes collide. Now, so the nature of doing physics has changed. If we want our students to do real physics or real mathematics or music, we have to factor in that the environment within which these things work has changed dramatically. Music is a great example, right? I mean, if you look at the music industry today, everything from how we create music, to market music, to sell music, to share music, to listen to music is completely different from what it was, let's say 30, 35 years ago. Journalism, you name it, every domain has changed, right? So in some way, everything stayed the same, some core way, but in other ways, because of the context and stuff, things have changed dramatically. So I think that's that interesting tension in this, what we talk about today's learning, is this sense of continuity, but also of change and disjunction. So.
Yeah. And that's a great way to frame it, because it really takes along many skeptics who have this sort of 21st century phobia saying everything is the same.
Absolutely. And I think that really connects with educators, because if you look at as a profession when we as educators first appeared, it was around 10,000 generations ago when we first settled and got agriculture, right? So once we got agriculture, you got this different people doing different tasks. So somebody goes hunting, somebody raises the crops, somebody looks after the cattle, and somebody educates the next generation. So as educators, we've been around for 10,000 generations, so to speak. And I think that continuity still stays. That said, it doesn't mean that how that plays out is still the same. I think that's the sort of interesting piece.
And so what's that shift or that mind shift that you feel educators also need to make with this changing time?
Right. So I think a couple of things, right? I mean, one thing is this sense that what we learn today is going to be the same that we will apply directly like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. That I think has changed. If you look at AI, if you look at machine learning, if you look at just, in India, for instance, BPO and all of those things, right?
Sure.
Professions that didn't exist before are there now. Who would have thought that there would be something called a social media person, right?
Yeah.
Now that's a job description. What do? I write 140 characters to send into the internet. I mean, but that's somebody's job and they're making a living out of it. That didn't exist a few years ago. So for web designers, so for data analysts, so on and so forth. So clearly we have to prepare people for a world that's continuously going to change. And so you cannot be training people for one job, one kind of skill set. You are training people for mindsets. For an ability to learn and unlearn, for an ability to be flexible, right? Those are skills that we need to be training people for. Certain foundational skills are still going to be there. If you want to be a game designer, for instance, which is a great profession which did exist, let's say 50 years ago, you not only have to know computer science and programming, you also have to have an understanding of music and theater and drama, of how these things experience, of design. So we have to think again. That's the other piece I think that comes up, is we have to look interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. We cannot be a physicist. So one of the things that I talk about, that we've written about, is that most of the jobs, new jobs that will happen, are going to be at the intersections.
Yeah.
They'll be hyphenated jobs.
Sure.
You'll be a bioethicist. So
Sure.
you need to know DNA recombinant technology and CRISPR and all of that, and also know your philosophy
Sure.
and ethics, right? You're going to be a game designer, right? So those kinds of things. So that's, I think, another big change that's coming up. I think the other thing is, at a very fundamental level, the fact that information is coming at us at such a crazy pace means that it is no longer about trusting where the information is coming from, but developing skills to question that information, to go back to source and say who wrote it, for what purpose. We've always talked about critical thinking. I think that has become just more important now, just given the pace at which this information is coming at us. So some of these things, I think, have to get factored into the teaching and learning process. Final point I would make is that I think some of these new technologies allow us to engage with ideas in ways that we could not do before.
Sure.
So I think one of the tragedies of EdTech in some ways has been that we have not really pushed that boundary. We have sort of taken EdTech to do more of the same. So we use PowerPoint to stand in front and give a lecture, as opposed to saying how can we use simulations to really understand how, trigonometry, for instance, right? In trigonometry, we still use the PowerPoint and we'll say, okay, this sine theta, cos theta, whatever, right? But we won't say, we can create a simulation which will allow us to understand how sine waves and the unit circle, or whatever it may be, or population dynamics, whatever, right? There are so many representational sort of powers of the computer that I don't think we have taken advantage of.
Sure. So just building on that point around education technology and the promise that it has, and how perhaps we underutilize its potential. Why do you think education technology has kind of failed to deliver on its promise? Is it our mindset about what education technology is promising perhaps too much, and we are falling short, or where is that gap?
I think it's a couple of things. And I wrote a blog post recently about the cycle of hype and despair.
Yeah.
So we will hype some tool and we'll say, oh, this is going to transform education as we know it, and then of course it won't meet that potential. Then we'll say, oh, all EdTech is doomed. So you can look at it from everything from the overhead projector to film to hypercard to the web to MOOCs, what have you, right? And I think partly it is because we are either over promising or people are over hyping for whatever reasons, and then it doesn't meet up to that. I think it also has to do with sometimes we have not thought hard enough about what the true powers of these tools are, right? The true powers of these tools are to be able to network, to be able to communicate with each other, to ask questions of the world and get answers from that, to be able to express ourselves in powerful ways. So one of the things we talk about is sort of what John Dewey talked about, the 4 primary impulses of learning, which is to inquire, to explore, to communicate, to collaborate, those kinds of things. We haven't pushed those hard enough, while we have focused on things which are sort of more as if they will solve every problem in education, rather than like a specific problem of teaching maths to 5th grade. That does not sound as sexy, but is actually quite powerful.
Sure.
So I think what we need to think about is not this all-encompassing solution, but rather multiple diverse solutions to the problems of education.
Sure.
Finally, I think the biggest piece that we have lacked is we have lacked sort of a systems view of the issue. So if you're an educational technologist, you work on developing an app or a piece of software or a website or whatever. At the most, you will work really hard to work with a few teachers to see how it fits into their curriculum. If you are really, really serious, you will think about how it maps into sort of the experience of learning of the student. And I spend a lot of my time in my life doing that. And I'm increasingly becoming aware that without us thinking of the systems within which this works, without thinking of the broader culture within which this is working, we will not have systemic success. So I'm sort of excited about the fact that the work I'm doing now is happening at the level of the systems and culture, which is incredibly hard work. At some level, developing a good app is hard work, don't get me wrong. But it is trivial compared to how wicked these problems are. So I mean, some of the issues around it.
And alright, so just taking off from the last point you said around learning experiences, and how that plays a critical role even when we are thinking about technology, there is a lot of art, craft that
Right.
goes into it.
Right.
So what are some of those principles for designing these learning experiences that really help extract that value for a learner,
Right.
and help in thinking goals,
Right.
as opposed to these different parts that,
Yeah,
that we
and I think that's the crucial thing. It's this part whole kind of an issue. So too often when we look at school, if you look at school, we have 50-minute periods. You do one thing 50 minutes, then you have 7 minutes to go from this hall to that hallway, or the teacher to come in, new teacher to come in, and we're going to do 50 minutes of this. It's never clear how those are connected together. It's never clear how those pieces fit together over the weeks and months and a year, right? And if you look at, so the person who we really get inspired by is like John Dewey and his book, The Art, the idea of an experience. The way he talks about it. So where he says that we all have experiences, right? We take a bus and go somewhere, or we meet some friends, or we watch a movie, or we go to a class. But not all experiences are educated. Not all experiences are transformative. So he talks about what are the elements that make an experience compelling, make an experience transformative. And I think the heart of it is really about this crafting a whole. So this sort of came to us when we were, when I was directing the master's program with my colleagues, thinking about the courses and saying that a program needs to be more than the sum of its courses. So when somebody comes in and takes the first class, what happens when they go to the next one? What happens when they go to the next one? And when they finish, how does that culmination happen?
Sure.
So that they see it as, I always give the analogy of a good movie or a good novel. So there has to be a sense of unpredictability to it. There has to be a sense of unfolding, of becoming.
Sure.
And we often don't have or haven't had that kind of language to talk about instructional design or course design.
Yeah.
So we try to bring a lot, and that, as you can imagine right off the bat, is both a cognitive effort, but it's also an affective, aesthetic thing.
Yes.
And so that's where the art and craft of teaching comes in. There's a great quote by William James where he says that psychology doesn't directly lead to teaching. Psychology is in science, teaching is an art, and it needs that inventive intermediary mind, which is the educator. And I think so thinking about how we can craft experiences for learners which allow them to delve into a topic, to engage with its ideas, to explore its mysteries, to be amazed by it. We often haven't found ways to talk about learning that way. And truly that's the only reason why many people do what they do, scientists and musicians and so on. It's not just because they're doing a job. It's because there is a sort of connection, there is a sense of growth. And so those are the kinds of pieces that we'd like to bring into sort of the educational process. Sort of designing an educator experience.
And is that a patience thing, that we sometimes run out of patience to say, we want to look at this whole over a long term, we want to just graduate people or get people through a curriculum that comes in the way, where
so that's a great example, right? So when we always talk about covering the curriculum, right? What we want to talk about is uncovering the curriculum, because that is so much more exciting. Like, I don't know what's going to happen next week. Like when I come into class, what are we going to do? We just did Pythagorean theorem. What's going to happen next? We don't have that sense of palpable excitement, right? And so I think partly it is that we are too busy and we want to get things done and we want to check off the boxes. But I think bigger than that, it is a lack of vision. It's a lack of vision of what education and teaching and learning can be. Right? That we get satisfied with instrumental reasons, right? We need to, in the US right now, there's this big push for STEM. Like everything is STEM. Like why? Because we need to be competitive, we need to be this, we need to be that. But if you talk to scientists, you talk to mathematicians and engineers, the fact that they have a job or they can make good money is actually lower in their scale of things than the sort of just the excitement of doing the work that they do. So I think, again, I'm not saying we shouldn't look at the economic benefits of education. I'm not saying that at all. But just looking at that to me seems limiting. So I think it's as much a speed of the world kind of thing as it is a lack of vision on our part.
Yeah, thank you for talking with us, and you can follow more about Punya's work at punyamishra.com. So do read his blog. There are lots of interesting insights, and we keep this conversation going.
All right, thank you.